We are living in a radically changed world, a world that I dare say 15 months ago, none of us could even have imagined. Over the last 14 or 15 months, we have gone from the ability to do what we want, when we want, how we want, to total lockdowns, from times in which we probably gave little thought to our health and the environment in which we live, to extreme anxiety about our health and the environment in which we live. Hardly a person has not in some way been touched by the COVID pandemic or by all of the things that have gone with it. In spite of that, now the world is changing again, or still. And so over the last few months, we have become more hopeful as vaccines have rolled out, as restrictions have lifted, and as people have begun the process of talking about the process of life getting back to normal. Of course, in the midst of all that, however, it is evident that for many of us, there is a pervading fear or anxiety that has continued. And so that's the reason that this talk, co-sponsored by O'Connor Mortuary, Vitas Innovative Hospice Care, and Temple Beth, is entitled Facing Fears in a Changed World. Just yesterday, the day before I recorded this video, I was talking to a friend of mine who lives in Florida. And though he's a few years older than me, he was talking about how though he has been vaccinated and has never gotten even close to being sick during the pandemic, that he has decided that just for safety's sake, he's going to continue wearing his mask and staying inside as much as possible. He jokingly said, you know, all of this is really a hermit's dream. And I suppose in a lot of ways that's true for him, though it isn't for many of us. In fact, for many people, we struggle right now in living in this sort of in-between world of wanting life to return to normal, and at the same time being fearful that life will never return to normal, or that our own personal health and safety might be in jeopardy. And so into that, while I don't want in any way to try to talk you out of those fears or anxieties, what I would like to do in the next few minutes that we spend together today is to talk through 8 important considerations for dealing with fear in a changed world. Here's the first one. And by the way, all of these are in the handout that accompany this video, so you can feel free to access that, either to read along with it or to have for a reminder afterwards of the strategies we discuss. Here's the first one. Acknowledge fear's reality. You know, fear and anxiety are not the same thing. We differentiate those not only in the mental health community, but even in just kind of general thinking. Fear tends to be based on expected, anticipated, or very present danger. There is a real possibility in front of me. So I am fearful when I am driving my car and a rainstorm occurs. I am fearful when I am home alone and an earthquake strikes. Those kinds of things are fear producing. Fear means that there is a real danger and it is really present at this moment. Anxiety, on the other hand, tends to be the, not really imagined, but the future possibility of something untoward happening. There isn't necessarily any evidence for that in the present. I'm not feeling particularly in danger at this moment. It is the anticipated expectation of danger that tends to bring about anxiety. Now, the truth is they have many of the same symptoms. They look the same in a lot of ways. And the reality is that fear, when not managed, eventually does frequently for many of us become anxiety. So fear is a response to a present danger. Anxiety is my response to an anticipated danger. Both of them perfectly natural, normal human experiences. They're not to be shunned or put aside or made light of or made fun of. They are typical human coping responses that actually provide some benefit, which leads to my second point, my second consideration, and that is that it is important that we appreciate fear's benefits. Some people, wags, I think, define fear as false evidence appearing real, F-E-A-R, false evidence appearing real. But I really don't think that's a helpful framework. Fear and anxiety are far more nuanced than that. And because of that, fear actually does have some basic benefits. I've thought of two of them. One is that a good, healthy fear helps keep me safe. Well, sometimes it's fear of paying a fine that keeps me driving under the speed limit. It may be fear in some ways that causes me to lock my doors, but that helps certainly not assure, but it helps to encourage safety. It helps to make me safer than I would otherwise have been. There's another benefit to fear, I believe, and that is that fear not only keeps me safe potentially, but it also reminds me that I am not in charge, that the world does not revolve around me and my desires, my priorities, and my way of thinking. Fear is a really good corrective on a self-focused world, a self-focused priority, a self-oriented lifestyle, because fear helps me to be always mindful of the fact that there are people and natural forces and other things around me that potentially can do harm to me or to those for whom I care. So what do? Well, a third consideration, I think, is that if you find yourself being fearful, often what happens in both fear and anxiety is we have a difficult time articulating what exactly it is that frightens us. And so I find it very helpful as a third consideration to make a list of the fears and anxieties that I experience. If you keep a journal, you might write one on each page. If you're using just a yellow pad, write one fear at the top of each page. I fear becoming ill. I fear for my children's safety. I fear that I'm going to lose a significant amount of my retirement savings. I fear that my home would catch fire and I wouldn't be able to get out. Whatever the fears are, the anxieties are, it's not even necessary that I label whether it's a fear or an anxiety right now. It doesn't matter if this is a real and present danger or if it's one that I am anticipating that could, by some chance, happen in the future. Either way, there might be 2, 3, 5, 10, 20 of them. Put one on each separate page, and that leads to the fourth consideration. Take this catalog of fears that you've made and write out what most frightens you about each one. Just begin listing the ways that plays out. Write down the worst case scenarios, the ways that you see that unfolding. Write them out, make them clear, be as specific as you can. Use multiple pages if you need to. Journal about it. Write about the fear. Take one per day and write about what frightens you the most about that. Make a list. Think of all the possibilities that you can. Come back to it and add to the list. That might seem counterintuitive in some ways. It might seem like, wow, that's just going to reinforce these ideas, these negative experiences, these negative thoughts. And that's certainly possible that it will, but more likely than not, what labeling the fear and writing about it actually does for us is that it helps us to take stock of what's real. It helps us to put a label on an experience that otherwise is just this ephemeral, massive presence around us that we can't really get a handle on. In many ways, dealing with fear often feels like I'm trying to nail Jell-O to the wall. And labeling, putting words to the fear itself and to the ways that I am experiencing that, where I feel it in my body, making a catalog and a listing of those fears seems to be very, very helpful for most people to begin to articulate and get down on paper, sort of in blue on yellow, black and white, what those fears really are. I said that was the fourth consideration. That was the third. The fourth consideration is this. So in other words, what we've said so far is acknowledge fear's reality. That's the first one. Appreciate fear's benefits, because there certainly are some. That's the second one. Develop this fear management strategy by listing the fears, making a catalog of them, and writing about that experience and what it looks like in all of its dimensions. That's this third one. Here's the fourth one. Look for contrary evidence. What are the facts? What are the things that refute these fears that I've written down? So for example, let's take a couple of possibilities. One of those refuting evidences might be, I fear that I would be asleep in my home and my house would catch on fire and I would die in the fire. And so making sure you have working smoke alarms, that you've checked the batteries, and perhaps you've changed the batteries whenever the time changes in the spring and the fall, like the fire department suggests that you do every year, and you follow those strategies religiously, that can help to add refuting evidence to the fear. In other words, you can begin to say, okay, I've actually taken some steps to mediate this fear that I have by reducing the actual risk that I have. What we're really doing here in this piece is we're assessing risk. Lots of people in our world, maybe because of the amount of news they consume or other media, or maybe because of just the people they hang out with or their own philosophical mindset or whatever it might be, believe that we live in a very dangerous world that is filled with violent crime. Reading the headlines of the newspaper, watching the news on the internet or TV would certainly cause one to make that conclusion. And it's a reasonable conclusion, because in many ways, humans do live in a dangerous world, and we have since the very inception of the human being. However, let me add some refuting evidence to that. The FBI says that violent crime has dropped steadily since the 1990s. Gun homicide, for example, right now across the United States is slightly less than half of what it was in 1993. So in a 20-year period, not even really quite that, or well, 30-year period, gun violence has declined by approximately half. Not nearly as many people die by gun homicide today as did just 30 years ago. And that's not to say that it's great. It's not to say that it's that we live in a wonderful world and everything is hunky-dory. It's simply to say that often what happens when I begin to introduce actual evidence and facts into my fears, it helps me to put the fear in context. It helps me to put the fear, the anxiety that I carry in the relational context of how I experience it in the world in which I am. And here's a fifth strategy, and that is, I call it this way: affirm the yes and strategy. Let me explain. A lot of us are used to yes butting everything. Yes, that's true, but that tends to make life very dichotomous, very black and white, very either this or that. What I encourage folks to do is to work toward more nuance and understanding the world in which we live, and to say, yes, that is true, and this thing is also true, and to hold these two realities in tandem. And by the way, there might be a third or a fourth or a fifth to hold with it. So here's an example. It is true, COVID has killed over 500,000 Americans, including people that you and I know and love. There is no doubt that this pandemic has killed an incredibly large number of people. It is almost certain that there are more people that died in 2020 than who normally die in the course of a year. It's going to be a few years before we know that for sure, but it looks like there certainly were more that died last year than died the year before or the year before that, and probably even more than what we anticipate increase year by year. All of those things are true. So that's the yes. Yes, that is true. Here's the and. For you, it might be, yes, COVID has killed 500,000 Americans, including some of my friends and family members. And I remain healthy, or and I have been vaccinated. And the vaccination appears to be very, very efficacious, very effective in preventing serious disease, serious illness, and death. And cases are declining. And restrictions are being relaxed, which indicate that those in authority are beginning to feel some significant traction that we are getting a handle on this disease. So that's what I mean by yes ending instead of yes butting. A lot of times when we think about strategies and things we do, what we often think about is it's either this or it's that. And what I am encouraging in dealing with fear and anxiety is that we say, yes, that is true. The thing that I fear is possible. And these other things are also possible. And based on the evidence that I'm finding, based on the contravening facts, based on the refutation that I have to the things that are occurring, it might very well be that this is also true. And then I can begin to make decisions based not just on the paralysis of the fear, but also on the fear plus the facts that perhaps provide some alternative narrative to it. Here's the next consideration. So what we said was acknowledge fear's reality, very important. Secondly, appreciate fear's benefits, because it does have some in keeping me safe and reminding me that I'm not the center of the universe. Thirdly, develop a fear management strategy by listing, making a catalog of fears and the very things that tend to disturb me about those. Fourthly, look for contravening, refuting evidence to the fear that I have articulated. Fifth, affirm a yes and strategy. Sixth, seek out professional help when needed, and maybe sooner than you think. A lot of times, anxiety becomes debilitating and disabling. It prevents me from joining into relationships. Even when it becomes possible to connect again with family, the anxiety that I have about my own health or the health of others prevents me from doing something that I really would like to do. that is a fairly good indication that it may be time to have a conversation with a physician and a psychotherapist. I wouldn't stop with just a physician. I would also talk with a mental health professional, preferably a licensed clinician who can help you sort through those anxieties. It is not enough to treat anxiety with medication, although medication can be a very, very helpful adjunct to therapy. But what we typically think about anxiety disorders of one kind or another today is that medication treatment is not typically sufficient. With medication, generally needs to be cognitive behavioral therapy or some other therapeutic intervention that helps me learn some new ways of thinking and behaving, some new ways to respond to my anxiety. That might include learning some relaxation techniques. It almost assuredly means learning some new compensatory strategies. Because of my anxiety, I need to respond this way, and this way. In fact, it's very likely that if you sit with a psychotherapist for very long, you're going to hear some of the very same strategies that I've talked about today, since I was trained as a cognitive behaviorist. So seek out professional help. That probably involves psychotherapy. It might involve some medication, at least short term. Talk to your physician, a psychiatrist, certainly talk with the mental health professional you're seeing about that. There are all kinds of folks that can make referrals of that. You can call O'Connor's, you can call Vitas, you can call the offices of Temple Beth, and any of the three of them can help point you in the direction of someone who can help you find resources to deal with anxiety if you're looking for something beyond your own abilities to cope and your own resources and your own coping strategies. And then lastly, embrace a spiritual focus. One of the most important things that I believe we learn about ourselves in the midst of anxiety is something that I said early on. I believe it was during my second consideration, and that is the piece that I am not the center of the universe. That's a spiritual construct, to be sure. It is not an accident that a faith community sponsors this video. It is because we believe deeply, and one of the things that unites O'Connor, Vitas, and Temple Beth in the community educational efforts that we offer is that we believe strongly that we are all spiritual beings, and that much of what we deal with that looks on the surface to be a psychological or emotional issue is actually, at least in part, if not at its root, a spiritual question. And so embracing your spiritual self, embracing spiritual resources can be very, very important. Finding the resources that will help you as you sort through this. That may be prayer, meditation. It could certainly include things like reading of the scripture and other inspirational literature. Worship and connection to your faith community can be extraordinarily powerful. Conversations with a faith community leader can be extremely positive and helpful as you sort through all of these kinds of issues. Finding the spiritual resources that anchor you in the midst of a very uncertain world. I said that was last. It was actually second to last. Here's the last one. Look after your physical well-being. One of the things that we know about fear and anxiety is that, like many other issues related to our mental or behavioral well-being, it depends in large measure on our physical well-being. How we eat. Are we eating fruits, vegetables, and other kinds of foods that nourish the body? Lean protein, avoiding fats and caffeines and things that tend to increase anxiety and make us less physically fit anyway. Being careful of the amount of refined sugar and other refined products that I consume can be very, very powerful. Making sure that I create enough time in my schedule for true rest, recreation, and relaxation. If I'm having trouble sleeping, doing the kinds of strategies that I find helpful, getting out of bed after 20 or 30 minutes if I haven't fallen asleep, doing some kind of activity, and then trying to return to bed again. Reading somewhere away from the bed and then going to bed, taking a quiet bath with candlelight and lights turned down can be very helpful to enhancing relaxation and creating a sense of wellness and physical fitness. And then, of course, exercise is extremely important. So making sure that I'm relaxing, that I'm recreating, that I'm resting, that I'm taking care of my nutrition, and that I am looking for ways that exercise, that move my body in whatever ways are appropriate according to my own physical fitness and the advice of the healthcare professionals with whom I work. We are living in an uncertain world. And sometimes the uncertainty of the world in which we live provokes in us senses of fear and anxiety. I encourage you to return to this video again and perhaps listen to it a second time when you're in a different place. Try a different strategy next time you listen to it than perhaps you're employing after hearing it this first time. Talk with a friend, share the video with someone else, and then have a conversation with that person about what you learned, what you discovered, what part you agree with, what part you disagree with. What parts have you found easy to apply? What parts have you found to be a challenge and a struggle? All of those can be great questions for one or two others, whether face-to-face or on a Zoom call or in a telephone conversation. Whatever you do, don't face your fear and anxiety alone, and don't just continue doing what you've always done before. Find some new strategies. Employ these considerations or others that you've found that help you. Learn from those around you and discover that while we live in a very changed world, we still live in a very wonderful world. Thanks for being with us.